Uh, we are live. I have an eye on the comments. If anybody can tell me if it's choppy like before, in which case I'm really starting to want ceases. Tim, if you could add it to send it to Chris Enns. Chris, we're live. I'm monitoring the comments just to see. I can also go check X.
Okay.
This is really strange. I've never seen this.
I will check X payment.
So far, there's no problems on X.
So it'll be on my end, then. That's interesting.
Ramandid says it's good now. Ramandid, another great guy to follow.
I sent the link to Chris.
Okay, it seems like everything's working.
Okay.
There we go. So we're just waiting for Chris Enns, but yeah, let me just, I'll try to reorganize everything for you.
Double check your audio to make sure your echo cancellation and reduce noise mic background is turned off or activated.
Good point, but I don't know if I can walk them through that live.
No, that's fine.
Okay, we're good now? All right. Well, at least it kind of panned out right before we got into round two. So people will have a choppy intro for everybody, but once we get Chris back, we can just start off with round two and describing the problem and then head right into round three if that works for everybody. Thank you, Payman.
So I'm going to hand control back over to you, Chris. If you want, maybe we can just start again with round two with Tom.
Perfect. Yeah, let's just do that. Tom, now that we can hear you, the stream is going better.
Okay.
Describe how you see the problems, how we got here, please.
Right from the beginning, back to our first position.
Absolutely, yeah, because no one could hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what I was saying the first time around, maybe it'll sound better the second time. That, you know, what I was saying before is that since 1867, we've had one Liberal Party. One. We've now had 5 iterations of the Conservative Party of Canada. And if you count the PPC, that's actually the 6th, although the PPC hasn't had a candidate elected, but it's still, I think, I still think it applies. And so one of the challenges I think that we have as conservative-minded voters is our inability to look at the big picture. We sort of have this propensity to say, we're not getting along. I'm taking my ball. I'm going home and I'm going to start over, or I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to do it the group way. And so there's a real difference between the right, who are much more individualistic in their thinking, versus the left, who are all about the hive mind. And I think there's a balance in the middle that should be had. But one of the things that I find interesting is, I think on the left side of the spectrum, they always kind of have a mission statement. They always have this sort of guidance where they know where they're going. If you look on the right, we can't even define our values, our morals, our ethics, or even our principles anymore. And I think that in itself is a little bit of a tragedy. And so what I would like to see in the future, and which is why I write about it a lot on my Substack, is we do need a very clear definition of who we are as conservative-minded Canadians. And so I think that that is a place to start. And one of the things that I've advocated for, and I've written about this as well, is when you want to start a group, one of the things that always seems to be missing, and this is what I would advocate. I've had a lot of people say to me, hey, I'm starting a group, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I just saw a message that I will respond to. But one of the things that is always missing is you don't have a clear mission statement about the group that you want to start. And I'm going to talk about a couple pieces that should be in that mission statement. I never hear groups talk about having a code of conduct. And I think the code of conduct is absolutely vital. And in your code of conduct, I believe that everybody who joins your group must agree to abide by the code of conduct and understand the consequence to not abiding by the code of conduct. And one of the things I would like to see for all of the groups out there, if you're talking about forming a new group, is defining when your group is going to terminate. What is your measure of success? What is it when you say, you know what, if we achieve this goal, this group no longer needs to exist? Because what I constantly see with a lot of groups is something called mission creep, where they started with one objective and then they keep tacking on more and more and more, and they lose sight of what the group originally started for. And so while I don't want to discourage groups from starting, I want them to start off on the right footing. Because what you see more often than not with a lot of the groups that have started, and a lot of the groups have actually ended unsuccessfully. They've broken up. I've heard of some groups that are now in lawsuits against other members of the groups. And it always comes back to the same exact issues. You have people talking off script. You have people going and taking the group in a certain direction, or they're speaking on behalf of the group, or they're getting excited about an initiative in the group that the entire group has not agreed to. And so what happens is the hurt feelings start, the arguing starts, and then you've got to have that very uncomfortable discussion of maybe asking the person to leave the group, who then goes into the front seat of their car, does a live stream video where they say, you know me, you trust me, I don't want to do this, but I really feel like I need to expose so and so, and I'm going to tell you what happened. Right. And we see these videos over and over and over, and they always happen. And so when I talk about having a very clear mission statement, and within that mission statement saying, when are we over? When is our mission complete? And I think that's a really important thing, because if you have a mission statement that actually defines what the measure of success is and when you can end the group, if there's a new cause, everything is in place already. You just update your mission statement, and then you can say, you know what, we've achieved that goal. Let's put that on their resume as a group. Let's now modify it and be very clear about what the next thing is that we believe that we can achieve together as a group. And so this is very difficult, because people don't spend time on what the mission statement is, and they don't spend time on a very clear code of conduct. Because, imagine belonging to a group and somebody very influential, has a very large social media platform. A lot of people agree with what they say, they like it, but they go off on a tangent. Everyone assumes that the group they belong to is in agreement with that. And then everybody in the group has to deal with the consequence to that. But that might not be a sanctioned thing from the group. And so therefore, what's easier, to go to that person and say, listen, do you remember the code of conduct? Yes. Do you remember signing the code of conduct? Yes. Do you remember what our mission statement is? Yes. The thing that you just did, is that part of any of it? Do you think that maybe you've stepped out of the crayon line a little bit there? Yes. Okay, let's have a conversation about how you can either go back on your social media platform and talk about what this means to you as an individual versus what this means as our group, and separate the two concerns. And then maybe we can reduce the harm to the reputation that we've just suffered. I can give you a great example, and I'm not here to point fingers or get into a fight with anybody, but there was somebody who made when I was on the board of directors for Veterans for Freedom. Somebody made some very disparaging public remarks about, a political figure in Canada. And because we were all veterans, we got attacked for supporting and not supporting this person enough. And we got attacked for even supporting this person at all. And so the interesting thing is the person wasn't even part of Veterans for Freedom. But because we were all veterans, it was all assumed that we were all collectively speaking as one. And this is the problem, is that you have to be clear about what your group is that you're talking about. Now, that's on a group-wide sort of situation. when we talk about people on the right, like I said before, they're individuals. They're individual minded. And, you've got, I often talk about, especially in survival situations or preparedness, emergency planning and preparedness, we talk about lone wolves. And there's a thought out there that lone wolves will do well. And then there's, what do wolves belong to? Packs. And in my view, I believe that lone wolves are going to die. Lone wolves get picked off. You're stronger in a pack, and the pack is stronger because they have strong wolves in it. But you can't go it alone. And this is where we have a real strong challenge on the right, is that we believe that we're a bunch of strong leader lone wolves that need to lead the sheep. And we get into these groups and we realize that the ones who are most vocal, the ones who are most willing to get off their butt and do something, more often than not, we're looking at a bunch of alpha males or alpha females, alpha wolves, and we get into the egos and the icons problem. And we don't have a way to put guardrails around the entire group and then focus on the mission of the group overall. And there's a saying, and I didn't come up with this, it was a veteran who noticed this or pointed it out. And it was about the convoy. And the saying was, a lot of people went to the convoy to do something, and some people went to the convoy to become something. And this is, in my observation, became true, because at the conclusion of the convoy and over the last couple of years, what we're seeing on the right is so many people have the energy and the courage and they want to fight. They just don't have a clarity of mission, and they don't know what they're fighting for anymore. And so people like me, and I'm sure everybody on this panel, become low-hanging fruit for the personal attacks. Because, Pierre Poilievre, Maxime Bernier, Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, Freeland, none of these people ever, well, I shouldn't put Maxime Bernier in there. I've had great conversations with him. But none of these elected officials have ever said a word about me or even acknowledged my existence on social media. And the largest number of attacks personally against me that I've ever faced were from former Freedom Convoy members. And people on the right attack me much more than people on the left. The left have just left me alone completely. And so I look at this and I think, okay, do you want to take over the reins? Is this what the issue is? Do you want to be the leader? Do you want to be the Messiah that comes in here and saves everybody? Or do you want to do strength in numbers? Because if you're better than me at doing all this, then by all means take over. I don't have a problem with it. In fact, you can take my lion's share, because I'm really tired. I'm really, really tired. But I want to say that if we don't find a way to start checking our egos on the right, then the right is going to have an impossible situation coming together as a group and defending what this country is supposed to actually be about, which is, unity. When David Redmond always talks about the 6 national interests. Nobody can name in Canada what the 6 national interests are, because nobody even does them anymore in the government, which used to be something that all military officers had to be trained on, the 6 national interests. So how can we expect that the people of Canada understand what those interests are? And the provincial governments don't know. They don't care. Look at the fracture. Look at the disconnect between every single provincial premier in this country. They fight just as bad as Twitter wars. And so I think the challenge really is ego. I think it's people that want to be the leaders, but they don't want to take a back seat. They don't want to follow. And I think that we have this idea that it's my way or the highway, and I'm taking my ball and I'm going home, as opposed to focusing all the time on what is the mission. And we can get into some more of this later. I think I've taken up too much time, but I think one really important thing that we have to recognize as Canada, as Canadians, is, especially on the right, and I think this lends more so to the right, is what are our morals, ethics, values, and most importantly, principles. because principles form the foundation of morals and ethics and values. And one of the reasons our society has been so degraded and our unity has been so degraded is because if you consider this as being a triangle, and on the bottom is your principles as a nation. You know, as an example, the United States Constitution, written by the US founding fathers, is a declaration of their principles of who they are as a people. And so the only way to attack the foundation, the principles, is to go to the morals, the ethics, and the values. When you start to attack those things, you leave your principles undefended. But the problem that we have in Canada right now is we can't define collectively what any of those things are inside of that triangle. So how can we have a strong foundation? I, as a conservative-minded person in Canada, cannot impose my principles on you. And if you don't align with them, if we can't even have a conversation in this country right now about what they are, what is it that we all want? And the last thing I'm going to say is this, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a pamphlet that I was given. I attended on the 13th of September at Christie Pitts in Toronto, that rally, the immigration rally. And as I was walking there, somebody handed me this pamphlet. And I very quickly realized that this person was on the opposite side of that day's protest. But as I was walking and being mindful that I was going to get a bottle in the head or a punch in the face, because we were outnumbered 20-1 by Antifa, I started to read this pamphlet, and I thought, you know what? We agree on probably 80%. Why can't we have a conversation about that? Where's the starting point? Why? Is because we don't come from a collective perspective of Canadian national interests, morals, ethics, and values, and we don't know what our principles are as a country. And so I think, and I would like to see groups on the right start focusing on those four things and build that base and build that triangle. Before we start trying to figure out how to save this country, we need to save what it is we're even fighting for first, or at least figure it out. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you fine folks who are, I'm sure, much more intelligent than I am.
Thanks for that, Tom. No, that was brilliantly said. I think, even in the comment section, you can see like you're on, I think it's like the starting point for where we're at, right? And defining it, whether it's ego, lack of structure, there's a lot of problems there. I just want to remind everyone that we had to restart the space. We had some technical difficulties. And so we're just starting round 2, which is defining the problems as far as what caused the infight. And Tom had a great introduction there. If you can repost the stream, that's great. And next we'll go to Chris Enns. What are some of the problems you see that are the causation for some of the infighting that we see within our community?
Yeah, well, I think that, first, can you hear me correctly? It's all good? Okay, excellent.
We got you.
Cool. So I've said this before elsewhere. I think that one of our biggest problems in terms of national identity and what unifies us is simply that idea that we're not American. I mean, you can't build a nation or a culture on not being something, right? You don't stand for anything. You just don't stand for that over there. And we have a lot more in common with them than we like to think. We have, and this may not go down well, but we have a culture of smugness. As someone who's lived overseas for a decade and then came back, it was very apparent. I'm like, we all think that we're right. And like Tom said, we agree on 80% of the things. It's those 20% that we allow to divide us into polar opposite camps that don't need to exist. And it's because the real enemies out there, whoever they are, whether it's, certain power structures, governance, mass media, whatever it is, they find those 20% of things and they use them to put a wedge in between regular people. And we just keep kicking this ball back and forth from one end of the field to the other and playing their game. All the things that are important are off this, hypothetical field, but they keep us on the field, kicking the ball back and forth. And we need to realize that this is their paradigm that they've constructed for us. And we need to exit that paradigm, this left-right, because at the end of the day, it's top-down. It's at the bottom, or as I see it, it's individual freedoms, decentralization versus centralization, authoritarian control. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks for that, Chris. Well said. I agree for sure. Andre, your thoughts, please, sir.
Well, I want to come back to what Tom was talking about, the principle and the mission. I used to work as a senior advisor, and I was working with vice president, high management, and there are those people that when they are in power, they have a lot of ego. I think it's a natural reaction. How can you manage the ego of people and to be able to transform it into a positive energy? Meaning somebody who has the power to be a leader has to understand that he can only lead with a good team. And I think Tom mentioned it, the idea of a mission, the idea of a vision. What would be the vision of Canada? We're in 2025, practically 26. We all understand the agenda 2030. Let's say we would say, what would be the vision of Canada in 2050 with great values? And Tom mentioned the principles. How can we redefine principle of Canada based on history? Let's not forget history. I come from Quebec, and there's a big misunderstanding because we have two founding people. I think we got lost in translation many times, but during the Freedom Convoy, there's a lot of people in Quebec who felt Canadian. They really understood what was the core identity of Canada, and they agreed on it, despite the language disparity. That was quite impressive. But there's still a lot of work to do if we want to reunite all Canadians. It means that we have to understand where they stand. I think about the Indigenous people. I think about how, I think Chris mentioned it, how those who are in power, they instrumentalize minority groups. Multiculturalism was a failure because there's always a way to manipulate minorities so you can weaponize them. We have to be able to invalidate this strategy or this tactic, if I would say. And I think we have to rely on an army. Let's say you have a good leader. I'm not talking about the political personality today. There's no leadership in Canada. The boat is going nowhere. There's no governance, and we know it. Most of the people who are broadcasting on alternative media, what we could say alternative media, social media, they know about it. But I think Tom mentioned it. The ego kicks in very fast when you start to have a good audience. You want to promote your message, which is normal. It's natural. But how can we? I use the word federate. Tim Knight always use syndicate. How can we work together with Logos? Debate. We don't have to agree. I think Chris mentioned it and Tom mentioned it. On many topics, we will agree. Freedom of speech, freedom of entrepreneurship, freedom of movement. We saw with the COVID mandate, we had curfew in Quebec. It was horrible. And I was aware of that since many years, but when it materialized, it was even more obvious that Canada was broken. And maybe since much more long that we think, because we think about the Confederation, we think about what happened in 1763 with the Quebec Act, and Charles Fichtner described this a couple of weeks ago. We have to be able to reunite and reinstate the history of Canada, as a country of settlers. We have to say it, country of the native people, how we can work together. And it is through debate, it is through Logos, and it is true conservative mind people have problems having, because they are proud people. We go back to the ego. So I think if we are able to define a mission, a vision for Canada, for, let's say, the middle of the century, the 21st century, because we have extraordinary challenge. AI it is something that is arriving very fast. It is there. Tim Knight is always mentioning a leap of progress, if we could call it progress. How we can manage this? We will have to work together to tackle, for example, the decline in demography. How do we manage this? We have no bird policy here. It's like it's a day-to-day management, the heavy bureaucracy. We all know those problems. I think it is important that we identify them. I used to do risk management. You identify 5 or 10 great problems. You classify them by level of importance. And then you start to define strategies to fix those problems. We will talk maybe later about how we could write strategies. When I wanted to run for the People's Party, the first thing that I saw was the lack of strategy, the lack of a mission, the lack of a structured communication plan. A lot of people have good intention, but how do they communicate? And knowledge. The right person at the right place. I saw so many people having a lot of power and are being incompetent because they're either too young, not enough mature. We have this level of maturity. I think I've met a lot of people in Canada now that I never suspected that I would meet. And I'm very happy because I see Canada as great potential with great individual, but we have to put the right people in the right place. As for leadership, I will end on this. Leadership comes from everybody. Everybody has a place. But define what you can do best and leave the rest, meaning that if you want to be a political actor, act like it. If you are, for example, an MP, an MLA, act like it. The duty, the responsibility, and first of all, you have to be an example for people. I think, I don't remember the name of the person. We had one meeting we had many months ago. He was talking about how we can inspire people by our own action. On social media, I'm a sarcastic man. I make jokes all the time. But when it is serious, we have to be able to inspire people and be moderate. I think it's important for the Logos, for how we can debate, respect each other.
Thank you for that, Andre. Payman, your thoughts?
Thanks. I'll try to bumble my way through my answer. I wanted to talk about something I call like the foundation. So this is the precursor to a strategy. Before you can have a strategy, you need people to be able to get along. Everyone has to speak the same language. If you're hosting a meeting and you want to talk about the strategy, you have Robert's rules for meetings. It's the foundation. It has nothing to do with the strategy. I want to identify something called the ground game versus the air game. So the ground game would be if you're running a campaign, how to manage your volunteers, how do you talk to each other? If you're running an association, how do you respectfully communicate with one another? And when that falls apart, it turns into like a high school bickering kind of thing where people don't get along. That is a problem. It stems from people who've never had to work in group environments, in teams, who've never had to run a project and then compromise. I'm not going to be addressing that. I'm going to be addressing the other one, the air game, which is sort of like the communication strategy, social media, and where that goes wrong. So my story starts in 2016. We can start there. Trump gets in, and it's almost the inflection point where you see the mainstream media dying. It took from 2016 to 2024 for them to acknowledge that they're dead, but it was happening, right? And then as I mentioned, I ran for the People's Party in 2024, earlier 2025, this year. Time is flying. Anyway, in the last election I ran, and I thought it would be a bit of a cakewalk because I figured we don't have mainstream media anymore. We have independent media. And if I can get the message out through independent media, they're going to be more rational, more reasonable. And I found that that's not the case. And ever since the election, now that the election is behind me and I'm not running for office, I'm not politically affiliated, I thought, okay, now there's no hurdles. People, it's easier for me to have a conversation. It doesn't work that way. So one thing I've noticed is there are people out there, there's these faceless people. There's nothing wrong with running a space. When you run a space, you don't have a face. But I find that people are hiding behind that. And if I was going to put my tinfoil hat on, if I was the RCMP or CSIS, I'd be like, this is a boondoggle. Like we can just put whoever we want in here, and we don't even have to pretend to hide their identity. I mean, it's just behind these avatars. And here's how they disrupt. So I'm going to read out some names. These are lists of people who I either wanted to bring on my show or I just mentioned in casual conversation. And immediately I got attacked. And immediately these people got labeled as racists. Now, because all these people are Canadians, they call them racist. If they're of a different race, you got to go after them a different way. Like you could call them a Fed or something. But here we go. Jeremy McKenzie, Jason Levine, Donald Best, Wiretap Media, Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, Arta Pavlovsky, Peter McIsaac, Jeff Colvin, Daniel Tyree, Tom Marazzo, Greg Wycliffe, Sean Taylor, Canada Poly, Kirk Reese, Susan Stanfield. So it's not just an isolated incident. It's not one Hitler figure. Like they go after and they do character assassination. And the way that they do it is typically they approach you in a DM or publicly, and they say, for example, Payman, be really careful. I'm going to with Tom. Be really careful with Tom. He's done some shady things in the past, and usually they're vague. They don't say, be careful with Tom. He planted the C4 explosive on this corner on this day, and he was indicted and he was let go because the chain of custody issue. They don't say that. If they do go into details, they'll pick one small thing. They'll say, and they'll take it out of context. Tom Marazzo, he's never won a case ever in court, and he's just wasting taxpayer money, and he's a federal agent. He's a chaos agent. What they don't tell you is the reason he lost in court is because the government dropped the law and the judge ruled that it's moot. So it's taken out of context. And the people that are driving this, they don't have to be RCMP agents. They don't have to be CSIS. They don't have to be on the payroll of any political parties. They have a unique skill set, and their skill set is be able to sift through a large amount of information, and they can from there sort of hop to a conclusion. And this ability, this superpower, if you have it gives them authority, it gives them power, it gives them value, it makes them worth something in life, and they run with it. And it has the appearance of I don't know, being above board, and there's value that's being added. But then when they do that to me as a podcaster, say, Payman, be careful with Tom Marazzo, I'm just warning you. I'm not telling you, but I'm putting you on notice, so you're warned. So now I'm thinking, like, if I bring Tom on, and Tom actually is like a terrorist, and he does something, it's going to impact my credibility. So it's an intimidation tactic, and it's almost bullying. And I've never run for any spy agencies. I've never worked for any, but I'm imagining that what these tactics that bullies use and the tactics that spies use, there must be very, very close alignment. It's an intimidation tactic, and it has a chilling effect because it erodes and it prevents free speech. So many times during the election, I had to take the coward's way out and not bring people on my show because I was running for election. And if somebody is accused of being a sexist, even if they are or not, or a misogynist, if I bring them on, I'm already getting attacked relentlessly by the Conservative Party because I'm a small party, right? I'm an outsider. I can't risk it, right? So it has a chilling effect. That's one thing. I already mentioned that you got these faceless people. One other tactic that I'll mention, and then I'll stop here. They set up a trap. So they say, I'm going to go with Chris Erickson this time. Chris Erickson is a misogynist. He disrespected this pregnant woman once in 1997. Now, if the trap that's being set is I have to come in and now I have to defend Chris Erickson. When Chris Erickson is coming on my show to talk about how water is wet, has nothing to do with that past experience. But the moment I defend him, they're going to have some evidence that he said something. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he said it as a joke. And now I'm spinning my cycles and I'm wasting my time, getting dragged into these conversations. Apologies if I made this kind of centered around social media, but I'm thinking in terms of the next election coming up in 12 to 18 months or whenever. If we can't get our independent media to act more professionally, be more objective, be more critical, I don't see us getting out of this uniparty system. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Payman, and I'll have some words on the topic after Timothy has a go there. Timothy, the floor is yours, man.
Thank you. It's necessary to make a joke because the air is pretty thick. So I just wanted to go on record saying that it was Liberals that created the Homeowners Association. So no, apparently that didn't land very well. All right, whatever. Moving on. I've been furiously taking notes on the side. So going back to Tom's comments regarding Freedom Convoy members, and what popped in my head when you said was Ingsoc, the party from 1984, 2% of the population comprised as party members. The rest were the proles. All of the excitement, all of the agitation, all of the ego takes place in that tiny little airspace, 2% of the population. Unfortunately, social media is a magnificent amplifier. Right. So that just a thought moving forward, that as we're trying to find a codex by which we can establish our new religion, where we're actually going to try to be a bunch of secularists defending a Christian core in our nation, which is going to be extraordinarily difficult because that problem is already happening everywhere else. If we're trying to find a language and a agreed upon dictionary, if we're going to try to find that, then we need to start. Ego is pathos. Let's just go back to Andre and me talking about pathos and logos. Ego is pathos, right? So that's the soapbox. So if you find somebody who's interested in the soapbox, he's focused on pathos, himself, his ego. You find somebody who's interested in the platform, administration, the stuff in the background that nobody really sees, right? That person is more rooted in logos, right? The word. They want to get the word. So these are not so much the disciples as they are the writers, right? So you find people for your movement or your organization who want to organize, they want to structure, they want to be the unsung, the quiet ones. These are your actual leaders. The rest are useful soapboxes, and they need to be properly collared and maintained. The problem with doing that in a three-ring circus that is the new media is they're all volunteers. And you can't tell a volunteer what to do because he's like, you're not the boss of me. Yeah, and then if he's a soapboxer and he has some value because he can draw a crowd and he can speak well and he knows his quotes, etc., then you're like, well, if I discipline him, then he's going to cry on his phone in his truck and make bad for everybody else. So then you realize that the soapboxer is also a contrarian, and the contrarian is in it for themselves. The contrarian is the shock jock. The contrarian is the one who wants to say the shocking thing to get everybody excited. You find the contrarian in your group early and you get them out early. So in your vetting process, when your early group is coming together, before you've even formed a mission statement, before you've got your vision together, when you're basically a half a dozen guys and girls sitting around at Timmy's, right, late at night going, somebody has to do something about something, right? You find out who is best fit for what, and you load the structure first, right? And unfortunately, in a crisis like COVID, the truckers' convoy, I think, was fully realized inside about a month, right? Like from early jitter, early chatter on the internet over to when they actually started leaving Vancouver. That all happened. So so the thing is, when our when we are sufficiently pricked, we move fast. We need people who are faster than to weed out, because that's when the parasites come in. That's when the virus comes in. That's when you open, because a strong character will come in and say, I know exactly what you need. We did this with my father. And because his sheer character and his charisma, or her charisma or character, will suck up all the air in the room and pull that to them. There's value in that, but they need to be collared. And I mean that on purpose. They need to be collared, because those are your dogs of war. And unless you're actually on the field chasing down the enemy, you keep that thing on a collar. So moving forward, as we try to Robert's Rules of Order and create an organization, we also need to understand not everybody who can work with you should work with you, right? So one of the things that I've learned through working with the Electoral District Association, and even though it's been painfully difficult to find volunteers, because there's only a very small percentage of the population even inclined to volunteer, because they know the cost. And of that percentage that is inclined to volunteer, they volunteer for everything. That's their nature. They're the givers, right? So then when you're looking for people like that, and you're desperate for people like that, and the opportunist sweeps in, right? I'll make a donation. I got a truck. I got a flatbed. I can do this and we can do that. And you get excited because you're all worked up and you've been working on this thing for 3 months and there's no movement. And suddenly your avenging angel sweeps in and he's going to carry you over the top. That's the moment you stop and say, who is this person? What do they represent? And if you don't have a mission statement, if you don't understand your vision, if you don't understand your goals, like Tom said, what do we do if we actually accomplish our mission? So then then what are we going to do? Right? So if we actually accomplish our mission, are we going to like close the book and say, well done, we've done what we needed to do? Right? So it's very important in my mind when building an organization that you work with a balanced emotional state and not be swept up in the crisis. Because when the right or conservative-minded individual finally tips their hat and says, okay, now I'm angry, they can be pretty strong, right? They can be pretty aggressive, and we need to be mindful of that. At every point, there has to be balance, and I think the idea of coming in with a Robert's Rules of Order type of concept and saying we need to be level-headed, we need to be cautious, we need to be aware, but still, you're still moving along. You don't get caught in the paralysis of analysis, right? But you need to be mindful of those individuals who come in very hot and heavy that put you at risk of losing, of inhibiting your success.
Thanks for that, Tim. And I'll just have some final thoughts on the first round here. You know, in just general summarizing, Tom talking about code of conduct, with Chris mentioning a lack of identity and saying, we know we're not Americans. Andre talking about being able to identify the problems and working back up through a risk management strategy. Payman pointing out some of the tactics. You know, again, anonymous accounts. I think there's a benefit to having those, but at the same time, what are you doing with that? And so it kind of makes you a little bit standoffish, and I can relate. Doesn't matter who I put on a poster for Nightcall. When I'm just trying to have dialogue, trying to provide people, it's vicious. You know, some merit to some things, but again, you know, for me, it's like it's very difficult to be able to do that. And then with the soapboxing, and when you say it's like a lot of it, the theme that is there is like, but when you don't have a structure, when you don't have principles, code of conduct, things for people to follow, and so anytime you try to build, they will come. The good people will come. The bad people will come, right? And so how do you manage that? And you can really only do that under a core structure that everyone can believe in, right? Whether it's principle based or an issue based. That way, then when hard decisions have to be made, they've already signed it. You know, I can remember numerous times when I was a community organizer, I always had people sign a code of ethics. You know, and there was one project I worked on where I had to remove 13 people. And again, it was just one after another, right? They saw money, they saw spotlight, they saw fame. And I'm just like, as a leader, for me, I'm walking with you. The only time you know that I'm a leader is when something goes wrong. right? And then I'll have a couple of people that they know what's going on, but the rest of the time we're all equal. We all have something to contribute. And for me, I would have my $20 in my pocket. I'd say, can you go for a coffee? They're like, sure. And I sit down, I pay for their coffee. I slide the code of ethics across. You're clear. You know what you did, right? And I'm like, yeah, have a nice day. The problem in doing that on social media is that there are mobs. You know, you're dealing with, it's not just potentially agents. It's not just, you know, there could be sociopathy, there could be narcissism, that there are people that are, if they don't get their own way, they become very infantile and very angry potentially. And then they start creating swarms of people to try and bring you down. You know, I won't swear, but bad mouthing you behind the scenes, almost trying to extort, you know, you either bring me on your show or I'm going to cause problems for you. And so we get into this situation where there's so many people that are very disingenuous with how they manage themselves. And we're in a situation where, how do you do that? So it's not about me, right? Because again, it's not about me. It's not about Tom. It's not about Payman. It's about what is the mission. And that's honestly, you know, pulling it full circle there. We are missing a mission, something that we can all agree upon, that is principled, that is values based, that we're not defining, you know, and what Tom said as well, what's the end goal? Right, so you can get everybody on, so that if there is a subversion of a mandate, or if there is changes that are being implemented by people who weren't there in the beginning, that have alternative motives, some of the ideas could be very great, but that's not the initial reason why the group was formed. And if you don't have a unified, okay, we're going to add this to what we're doing, then you have all of what Tom described and others have described as far as that breakdown. And a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, but there are people out there, they just don't want to have unity. That's their goal. So whether they're agents or they're just miserable nihilists, you know, just very miserable, you know, maybe some child trauma, I'm not sure. But at the same time, you know, we have to be able to figure out a way to maintain, like, let's start adulting this. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring people together today, was kind of get to that point where you don't want to be exclusionary, but you also can't be completely inclusive if people are just coming in there to disrupt what's happening, right? And so you can't say, I made the decision. It's like what Tom said, code of conduct, ethics, right? If your conduct is unbecoming in relation to what the mission or the mandate of the group is, then you have a document. Doesn't mean they're not going to create any problems behind the scenes. They still will, but I think that potentially, but I still think that, you know, when you have leadership is about a submission to duty, not elevation to power. That was a famous native quote, Gordon Tatusis. You know, it's true. You know, if you want to be and especially in where we're at now in today's world, if you see it as a duty and you see the people you're working with as having value and you want to walk with them as opposed to telling people what to do, there's a lot of different leadership styles out there. And the more that we allow people to have a spotlight or tear other people down, you know, it's a hard one to navigate because of the complexities of different personality types and everything else we're seeing. So thanks for that. That's the end of round two. Now we're going to get into the fun part about Robert's rules and how do we get take those next steps towards defining some of the things that we want to see moving forward, and not only for the groups that we're probably involved in it, but for people who are out there wanting to start groups. So Tom, you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm sure you've got more in regards to, I read your Substack, so I know you got lots there. Please give us your thoughts on how do we move forward. Actually, wait, I'm going to go to Payman first. Do you want to give us just a brief summary, Payman, on what exactly Robert's Rules is? And then we'll go to Tom. Payman, floor is yours. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that. I briefly looked at Robert's Rules. So Robert's Rules, there are a series of rules to follow so that you get a more organized meeting process. So people aren't screaming over each other, people aren't cutting each other off, taking away people's voices. But to me, Robert's Rules, it's a set of pseudo rules just to prevent chaos in a meeting setting like a AGM meeting, and that's kind of what we're trying to achieve here. Is there a way that we can come up with a set of rules that, as you mentioned, Chris, like social media is a different beast. You got all sorts. You got millions of people, first of all, and no one's going to sign a contract. So how do we do that?
Thanks for that, Payman. Yeah, if you've been in any corporation, unions, politics, boards like that, it's just a standard set of rules to try and keep and maintain civility within a meeting structure. So thanks for that, Payman. Tom, the floor is yours.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me of a really good friend of mine, Jack McClellan. Always during the convoy, he would try to use the talking stick. It could be a pen, it could be a stir stick, it could be a straw. But if you had the stick, you got to talk, and everybody else had to wait their turn and ask for the stick. It sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's a couple of things I do want to say about the code of conduct. and why I believe that it's so vitally important to groups. And this, I want to go a little bit beyond just the code of conduct, but the reason that you want to go through this process of defining sort of the code of conduct and the rules and the mission statement, like I'm currently the interim president of the Ontario Party, which is the leader is Derek Sloan, but I'm the interim president. I took over during the last Ontario election, but I have spent months and months writing. When I took over, we actually had a party charter. That's really the only major document that we had. But I started to make the constitution, the ethics policies, guidelines for the way the spending based on Elections Ontario, all of the boring, nauseating documentation and governance and all of that stuff that are vitally important. But here's the thing in my mind. This is the perspective I take, and I think maybe Andre can help me out on this later, because when you're talking about risk management it could also be defined by the idea is it's not that you're eliminating all risk, but sometimes you have to identify the risk but transfer it away from you. There's a component to that, right? And so one of the things when I approach what I'm doing within, every group that I'm involved in, or even the Ontario Party, I'm not, and I also wrote last year, or probably a year and a half ago on my Substack, my Declaration of Non-Confidence. So this was a document that I modeled after the United States, the Founding Fathers' Declaration of Independence. We can't break off from the king, although that's a different conversation altogether. But we're not looking at a king that we're upset with like the Americans were. What we're looking at is our own federal government that we're upset with, and we can't seem to break away from them. But it's really about the non-confidence. So when I wrote that document, it was really a pronouncement of, we are unsatisfied with you for the following reasons, and this is what we'd like to see happen. But this is the perspective that I want to kind of plant in people's minds, is you can't build a system or a collective or an organization or a group based on the character of the best people. And I know that sounds very pessimistic, but unfortunately it's true. You have to create guardrails and rules and regulations for the worst of the people that are going to participate in this group. You have to have regulation that confines and restricts their power, which is what the American Founding Fathers tried to do with their Constitution. It's the restriction of power into far too few people, like the 2% that Timothy was talking about. We want to restrict that through regulation. And one of the things that your code of conduct does is it applies the same standard to everybody, from the leader of the group right down to the newest member. And this is a fundamentally important thing that I need. I hope that viewers understand. It's not that you're trying to be tyrannical. It's that you're trying to be very pragmatic and realistic and just acknowledge and accept that human nature, that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so therefore you've got to create a system that does the very best it can to constrain the power of the few, because they will be tyrannical against the many. And so I think that's important. It makes it stronger when you have great, strong, ethical people that can participate in it. And I think it takes even stronger people to fight to keep those guardrails in place. And although I've sat here and I've talked about the United States Constitution, clearly, as great as the attempt it was, or the intention of it was, the US Constitution itself needs a 2.0, right? And so this document, or this ideology, again, we can see, invariably bad actors will always find a way to get around those guardrails. So it needs a reinvention. I think the Americans need a reinvention. I still think theirs is a better system than ours for a couple of reasons, but I don't think it's vastly superior to ours as well. I mean, I would prefer that we were republic as as opposed to a parliament. But look, I would love to just have the conversation about how do we put the power back into the people. And if you really, really want to dig into this topic, I suggest going and reading some of the articles by Bruce Pardy, who's a law professor at Queen's University. He writes extensively on this. And in fact, I would argue that Bruce is more libertarian than anything. And he talks about these types of powers that over decades have been transferred. You know, it was supposed to be to the commoners, you know, to parliament, to the courts, and it just seems to all have now ended up in the prime minister's office, right? Or the premier's office. And so, you know, when I look at the idea of creating groups, I think you have to start with your morals, ethics, values, and principles. And then from there, create guardrails in your fundamental foundational documents that support those agreed upon foundational documents. Because that's what they did for the US Constitution, right? We call the United Kingdom the cradle of democracy, and sometimes we refer to Rome as that. But the difference between the two is at Rome, the emperor was still above the law. In the cradle of democracy, in the British version, the king was susceptible to the law. And so we want to get back to where we're putting the power in the hands of the everyday ordinary citizen, but we got to give them something to not be so uninterested in, not engaged, completely detached. We got to give them something to want to get involved in. And yeah, I think the charismatic leaders, an example would be Donald Trump. You know, he had these crazy mega rallies even after his first term. He was still doing those. You know, people looked at him like a political messiah. Okay, we saw the same thing happen in Canada. You know, Pierre Poilievre had a 20-point lead going into the last election, and was largely viewed. People did not want to take a chance on the PPC, even though I think a lot of people believe the platform was much better, but they didn't want to take a chance and hand the election over to the Liberals again. And you can see the evidence of that between the 2021 election and the 2025 election. And, you know, the charismatic leader wasn't good enough for Pierre Poilievre. That dynamic didn't follow through because people were elbows up and they were suffering badly from Trump derangement syndrome and orange man bad, that they disconnected from their own, you know, cognitive abilities to see the bigger picture, because politics is boring. It's the greatest show on earth in America, but here it's a commercial, right? And so we have a very disengaged citizenry, very uninterested voter base. Yeah, you need the charismatic leader to get the people to pay attention and to listen. But what is the substance? And this is what I thought the downfall of the Conservatives was in the last election. They were, it was an empty shirt. There was no substance. It was 100% slogans. And I'll say this, I'm not here to pick on the Conservatives. I'm just trying to look at and do an analysis of what happened. You had a 20-point lead. You lost it to the most hated government in Canadian history, or at least in my lifetime. But what happened? You built your campaign around slogans. Axe the tax, bring it home. I didn't even know what any of that meant. The PPC had a solid platform, but the leader couldn't galvanize a base strong enough. So we had a disparity between both parties. But this is what happened. The day Justin Trudeau stepped down, and they put Mark Carney on his first day as the unelected prime minister, with the stroke of a pen, took away Axe the tax by suspending the carbon tax, and the Conservatives are standing there with not even a slogan left because they had no substance. They had no vision for this country. Nobody could follow it. So they had some charismatic leaders. He chewed an apple, great, that got some attention, but he had no substance. It was all about slogans. Why? Because he has no morals, ethics, and values and principles that ordinary Canadians could identify with, other than I hate Justin Trudeau. So, like you're saying, I think, Chris, you had mentioned, our values are, we're not American. And I agree with that. I grew up in a border town. So I agree with exactly with that point that you made. But Pierre Poilievre's greatest asset was always Justin Trudeau. It wasn't the belief system that Canadians had in the Federal Conservative Party. It wasn't the vision that they were following. It was just that you're not Justin Trudeau. Well, what did the Liberals do? They got rid of Justin Trudeau and they suspended the carbon tax, and it rendered the Conservatives completely neutral at a time where the infighting between the PPC and the CPC was at an all-time high, and we could not capture any of that stuff. Why? Because nobody was coming out and talking strongly with a charismatic leader and with a clear vision. Okay, I don't want to say that because I think that's not correct. I do think that the PPC had a very clear vision of where they wanted to go. They just couldn't pull the claws of the CPC voters to take a chance. Why? Because CPC voters do not have courage. They say they want change, but they will do nothing to get that change. And we see that in the voter results. And that's the problem. The CPC voters are not coming from a foundation of principles at all. If they were, they would look at the PPC's platform and say, there's problems with that party, but I'm going to get involved and I'm going to help those people correct all the deficiencies I see for them, because there's nobody to be galvanized around, or there's no charismatic leader with this clear vision. And this is what I'm trying to say is, we had some great things from PPC. We had some decent things from the CPC, but we couldn't put it together in a unified right-leaning vision for Canada. And so again, I apologize. I'm dominating the airwaves, and we have all you other guests here that I'm sure have a lot of great things to say. So I'm sorry for doing that again. Go ahead.
That's okay, Tom. I think it's one of those things too. You've hit a bunch of points there that are super important, and it's hard. I could go into some critiquing of what you just said as far as the election side of things, but I'm not gonna go there today. I'm gonna move on and let Chris. What are some solutions in relation to Robert's rules? Some of the things you'd like to see as far as how to bring an effective group together. Or yours.
Yeah, well, like you said, there's a lot of things that Tom just said that I'm like, oh, you could jump off from here into a plethora of different topics, all interesting. And I think that the main thread of what Tom just said is, and that kind of brings it back, is about power and corruption, right? The comment about Rome, for example, about, well, it wasn't really a republic, the emperor, etc. It's like, well, if people had the courage to resist and the republic turning into an empire, you wouldn't have had this problem in the first place, right? Rome could have been this cradle of democracy. England learned those lessons, right? They saw other people, leaders having their, decapitations and revolutions, and they wisely said, we'll adopt a constitutional monarchy, because, well, they lost some of their own kings anyway, right? So that's important. They learned that lesson, and that kind of pacified the population, right? We have a very sleepy population. The fact that nobody wants to become a republic, and, well, not nobody, but the majority, and stay a constitutional monarchy is insane to me. I'm like, why wouldn't you want to have your own sovereignty as a state? The US Constitution is fantastic. Maybe some updates could be useful, but I think that opening that would be a disaster. The people who want to renovate the US Constitution truly want to dismantle it. They don't want to improve it. So they better just leave it alone. I listen to Mike Lee, who's a senator out of Utah, a lot. I love what he has to say. He's very good at explaining. He's a constitutional expert, And he explains how in the United States, a lot of things went awry in the 1920s when Congress decided everything was about trade, which was the only thing that they managed. And then they could also delegate now everything to all of these agencies, and they could have all care, no responsibility for anything. And so the United States fundamentally changed in the 1920s. Of course, it changed a number of times prior to that, but that's the distinct one that leads us into the present situation in the United States, from what was, the ideal of the late 18th century. So how does that bring us back, right? The whole point is that our mission statement has to be what we're all about. And the convenient thing is that our group, I believe, is about how do we galvanize the population into realizing what I stated earlier, not to, become egotistical, but it's about individuals and society as a collective of individuals versus the state or any kind of superstructure that wants to impose its will upon us. It doesn't have to be the state, right? It could be corporations. It could be some kind of supranational organization like the UN, World Economic Forum, whatever have you. That's the thing. And so our mission statement, our code of ethics has to reflect that, right? We cannot become a cult of personality. We can't become tyrannical, because those are all the things that we're fighting against. So for this particular group, it's actually quite easy to stick to the script, because what we're trying to oppose has to also be, we have to build the safeguards into our own code of ethics. And so I think that's where I'll leave it, and I'll let Andre take over.
Go ahead, Andre. Thanks, Chris. The floor is yours, Andre.
I will make two comments. The first one is toward what Tom was saying about the code of ethics and some principle. It's not common only for Canada. I think the Western world is in crisis. We see it in Europe, and we see it here. Why United States looks like it's spared from this crisis? I think Chris mentioned it. It's the Constitution. It's not perfect, but the Constitution was written so it would last in time and would not deprive the future generation of their freedom, and would not oblivion the history of the past generation. I think the idea of John Adam, one of the writers, was to make sure that the Constitution would be strong enough, but would give latitude to people. That's the first comment. We don't have this in Canada. Great Britain doesn't have a written constitution. This is because you can rely on what you say, common law. Common law means justice between two actors who have the same power. People who are educated, cultured, people who can debate, they can disagree. Charles Fichtner was referring to the 13 colonies, and he was saying at the time, those individual, they had many newspapers, they had more newspaper than they had in Great Britain. They were able to publish, debate, educate people, interest themselves into what we call the politic phenomenon. That's the first comment. The second comment is toward how do we syndicate or federate what we would say journalism today. What is journalism? Mainstream media has lost their soul to the devil. They sold their soul. They do not report anymore. They are organ of propaganda. Alternative media could be extraordinary, but they can also be a trap because of the cult of personality. The code of ethics is very important. And I will just end on one thing. When we make a consensus, the idea of a consensus is that, let's say we're 6 individuals here, and we finally agree on something. But I disagree, but I agree to join the consensus only if you mention the disagreement. That's the real sense of a consensus. It means that you incorporate all the debate and all people who are against the idea, but because of national unity, they would join the consensus. Think about what Justin Trudeau said. We believe in science. Science is not a belief, it's a process. And during the COVID mandate, they were asking citizens to have a consensus. There was no consensus. And if you want to bring back, let's say, patriotism, the sense of duty, responsibility, people, they need to feel that the leader of the country, they are bound with a duty, their duties, and they have to give something. And we say the state has the monopoly of violence, and they are because of security, but you have to give them what this sense of security. What do now the state has become a super state. The super state is using security to deprive people of their freedom. And we know where it goes. From a republic, it goes to bureaucracy, to fascism, and then to authoritarianism or totalitarianism. And we are on that path now. It is not because Canada does not have a chance to get out of it, but we have to act. And the only way we can act is, first of all, as intellectual. We have to be bound with a code of conduct. Tom mentioned it. We have to be bound with this. When you go work for a private company, you sign a contract. And if you say something about the company on social media and your boss comes and says, "What you're bullshitting the country, the company," you signed an agreement, loyalty. They were appealing to loyalty of people during the COVID mandate, but they were not even bound by their own duty. So restoring this is maybe the most difficult part, because you appeal to individual. Each and every one of us are responsible for what is happening now. Personally, I know my responsibility. I know what I did right, and I know what I did wrong, and I'm happy to talk about it. And I will not be offended if somebody points me when I'm wrong. I hope that somebody points me so I can improve myself. I think the fact that we can syndicate individuals like this is a good start. And thanks, Chris, for doing this, because we have to multiply those efforts. It's the only way we can counter what is happening without targeting any individual in particular.
Thanks for that, Andre. And I'm noticing themes here, as far as the code of conduct, ethics, the identity side of things. I'll have a little bit more to say before go to Payman and then Timothy, but I think it all comes down. You can have all the documents in the world, but if you have no will to enforce, then nothing ever happens, right? And I think that, when you take away, when you mention loyalty to the documents of the principles, as opposed to loyalty to an individual leader, you should be able to move a leader out, and the principles and everything are still intact. And those are, that's where the loyalty should be, is to those principles and values of the organization or group that you're with, not any individuals or any side cliques that may form. So Payman, but floor is yours.
Before this meeting, I went to ChatGPT and I actually, I said, what are Robert's rules for order? And it's quite long. It's not as long as, say, the BNA Act, but it's like for anybody that's played the game Monopoly, it's like the rule book for Monopoly. So it's you fit like a page or two at 8.5 by 11. And I started thinking about the story of Hippocrates, the physician from a couple thousand years ago. He's roaming around wherever he is in Greece, and at the time he's a healer, and there's a whole bunch of people dabbling in poison. And he came out with a really simple principle. He said, I'm not going to work with anybody that engages in poison, anybody that works with poison. And that's, believe it or not, the foundation of what we today call the Hippocratic Oath: above all else, do no harm. And it endured because it's very simple. And I started thinking, like, how could we apply that to this, young, in its infancy alternative media? We could do something like attack the message, not the messenger. And the reason I keep hammering in on this is Tom, he uses the phrase "the mission," I've never been in any armed forces, but I always think of myself as a soldier. Even when I was I had a company. Everybody has their role. It's not about them. So when you're installing a data center, when you're building an apartment complex, you have a role, and you have to accomplish that role. That's how I see the exchange of information as Canadians, as we're trying to navigate what's going on in our country. Chris understands maybe something with First Nations. Andre understands something with oil and gas. Tim understands something with political parties. Chris understands something, well, the ostrich farm, but it's generally running for political office. And we communicate this stuff. I don't care if Chris was an alcoholic. I don't care if Tim has a history of speeding. That's not my concern. That's the messenger, and I'm more concerned with the message. And I'm wondering if there's a way. It has to be a very, very, very small oath or manifesto or doctrine, but something that we can share. So when we get attacked online, we can just shut them down. It could even be like a hashtag cancel culture. But yeah, we'll see if my idea takes off or if we're going to get screwed again in the next election. Hopefully somebody will come up with a strategy. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Payman. I think that there might be a need to do a second one of these where we can kind of lay down what that looks like. Today is more like the foundational structures as far as what's needed, but not telling other groups what those principles should be, what those ethics should be. It's kind of a generalization as far as where the faults may be, and then what tools can be used to help people move forward in a more productive manner. Thanks, Payman. Tim, floor is yours.
In my roles as an administrator and a strategist, I'm very mindful that the concept of founding documents establish your boundaries. And boundaries don't just keep the bad guy, the wolves, from getting into the sheep. They keep sheep from straying off out into the wolves. Because if I lose a sheep, that's income or food or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So while the right mind, the conservative individual says, don't fence me in, because generally they are a law-abiding type of individual, whereas we mentioned earlier, laws are defined to identify what is harmful behavior and to restrict harmful behavior. And whereas the general conservative-minded individual is likely to be more mindful and stay within a social norm, right? So you don't really need to make, well, you still need to make rules. That's why we have a civil code. That's why we have torts, right? That's why we have the Tree of Life. That's why we have criminal code, military code, international law. All of these are made to establish what is effectively a permeable membrane for civilization to move around in. So in my role as an administrator, someone who actually who makes documents like this as part of my work, I'm interested in establishing, like Payman said, small sentences, right? Grade 10 reading level, right? Something that will appeal to everybody and doesn't waste space and time. So my thoughts when I lean toward like the value of a petition, the document, not its political weaponization, which is useless because petitions are pointless, but the document, the structure. So if we were looking forward to some type of initial documentation and we want to restrict our mission list, one mission, one thing, one time, maintain focus, because men are garbage at multitasking. That's a fact. But if we put our energy as a group into one task, one mission, and we say this group is going to do this, and when we have accomplished that, we will shut down this group and give each other a pat on the back, or consider retooling for another adventure. But that needs to be defined early, and whereas statements assist to do that, right? So your mission statements need to be very, very simple. What I mentioned was to identify what success is. I can't just say, I'm going after the government. I have to define very clearly what I'm doing, right? I know with Parents Voice BC, which is a civil society, a civic society out in British Columbia, that their aims are to help people to become more involved in municipal politics. right? So counselors, mayors, school board trustees, etc. So they have a very clear purpose, and that is to assist interested parties who are of a like mind, right, of a culturally like mind, to overcome the obstacles and the challenges of engaging into that type of a contest to become involved in municipal politics. That means they have a very clearly defined mission. There are some secondaries and tertiaries, but those support the primary mission, which is to help people become involved in municipal politics. So if we're going to give recommendation or become involved in something, one mission, clear statement of what we call our success conditions and what we call our failure conditions. We need to be honest. We need to be honest. If we go out and say we need 3 to 1, right, in the field of battle, and then we say, okay, so if I'm 1 to 1, does that mean that I have to retreat because I've met my failure conditions, right? So we need to understand these clearly. We have an organizational model, and there are a gazillion of them out there. Pick one that works well, and one that is low labor, because you're all volunteers, right? And the top 3 or 4 are going to end up doing 80% of the work because Pareto's rule exists, right? So if you know that, then you plan for that, and you won't be overwhelmed, and you won't be angry with everybody else for not doing their part. Standard operating procedure and Robert's Rules of Order falls into that category, right? How do we have meetings? How do we organize meetings? Who has the talking stick, right? How do we handle discipline? How do we handle morale? What else we have? And an exit clause. So you must know, right? When enough of us have been sent to jail, do we shut the society down? Right? Or do we consider that a success, right? So what is your objective? So these things need to be identified early, and you need to make the list as short as possible. That's just my thought as far as moving forward is concerned from an administrative and a strategic position. That's, you should be able to get, Payman's always saying, Tim, give me a 1-pager, give me a 1-pager, give me a 1-pager. And the idea is right, because it forces you to be concise.
Very well said, Tim. Yeah, cut from the same cloth in many ways. It's not easy, but at the same time, there's so many pitfalls. If you can take the time to do the diligence in the beginning to understand that and make things clear, not only does it protect the mission, but it also gives people confidence in joining you in that mission. And a lot of it is, you can have the best plan, you can have the best ideas, but at the same time, if you don't have those mechanisms in place, you're leaving an opening, which is almost a disservice to what you're trying to accomplish, right? Before anything begins, you look at the size of the hill, what equipment do we need, how many people do we need, right? I would go into a community and first, when I was young, but I learned the first time, anytime you bring a group together, it's air your grievances, was what I would do as a first starting point, right? Let them air their grievances, but then as you form the group, then this is what the focus is. Can you agree with that? No, we're not doing that right now, maybe down the line, but you have to make sure that everything is codified so that you don't have people that have an expectation that their grievances or their mission, it's all about keeping everybody on track and having the ability to maintain that cohesion towards that understanding of walking together. And the next step was always for me was, let's do a skills inventory, right? So I'd hold a barbecue and nice music and stuff. If you want to participate, bring people together. What are you good at? And I was very surprised. People don't think they have any transferable skills. They don't think they have any value. And then you sit down and you have those conversations with people. Say, tell me about yourself, right? And where have you worked in your past, right? And not only in doing that, you're identifying skills that may transition to help the group in a very tactile way. You're also empowering them. Those little flickers of internal fires can start to become, in those flames will grow over time, right? So you're having that situation where you have the structure in place, then you have the people that are around you that are willing to contribute. And as that grows, you're going to have more and more people come in. But having a place for volunteers to make sure if someone's willing to volunteer their time and they're coming at it with good faith, make sure you get them involved in something, because a lot of people, when they join groups, they're just simply looking for a sense of community, which is a lot of what right now, a lot of people are probably still coming out of their caves over the last 5 years. Don't trust very many people. They've been betrayed. They don't know, is it safe? right? So there's a lot of things that come with community organizing, but to maintain that momentum, I think my experience was, it was never about me. I always describe myself as a messenger. It was always that loop as far as, and these are like very specific, but there was a goal, whether it was a not-for-profit or whatever in a community that was causing problems. It was never about me in those circumstances. Yeah, I can put the tie on, I can go talk to those people because they've got a vocabulary that I can match. But in the end, when they tried to say, hey, great job, Chris, and it's like, I loved being able to, because I don't take compliments very well. It wasn't me, it was us. And so to be a stand up, everybody stand up. And then it's, is the baked salmon ready to rock? So let's go have some fun because we made it over that hill. And then there was always that it was over. There was an end. The mission had been accomplished. And then if you guys want to stick around, you guys want to try and do something else, then you redefine there. And I think that, if there's clarity of vision, like you said, very short. I used to do union bargaining negotiations, very short. Don't leave any room for vagueness or misinterpretation, right? Have a must instead of the word should. Very important as far as defining what terms you want to have in regards to what everyone can agree on. And it's not about being authoritarian, because the people who write the documents have to be held accountable to them. Right? It's not just, we're writing rules for me and not for thee. We see that every day, right? So that's my thought, the final thought on round 3. What we can do now, what time are we running at? We're about an hour and a half. So if there's any final thoughts in regards to this, I do want to do this again, and maybe we can come on and we can actually do the actual key points. But today the real goal was to kind of give people some tools to start that process. If they want, what are the pitfalls and what to look out for, bringing all of our experience together and to be able to help people say, hey, if you're going to do this, these are some of the things that you need to consider ahead of time. Don't get into the frying pan and then have to backtrack without having the tools that you need to take corrective action if you need to. So anybody, if you have, you want to say anything else, otherwise we will go around the table for some final thoughts. Just open up your mics and go if you have anything you'd like to add to what can we do to move things forward in a positive way with civil discourse.
I'll start it off,
always works
because nobody
All
wants
right.
to be the first one, right? One thing I'll say is, oftentimes I get to speak around the country. I travel to different places. I'll be in Regina on the 18th, actually next week, for the Prairie Rising Forum, which hopefully I'll see a bunch of people out there in Saskatchewan that I've met before. But one thing that I've always noticed since I go to all these different group meetings is the average size of the group is probably 50 or less. Every time I go to one of it's about 50 or less. And I would say the average age of the people in the room was somewhere around 55. So be aware of that. But if you're civic minded and you have an issue, and this issue public, you're something that is so important to you that you do want to create your group around it, I would say first and foremost, look and see if there's already a group. Okay, don't jump into the driver's seat of an 18-wheeler. Okay, look and see if there's a group already. If there's not, then my next piece of advice would be build out your mission statement, build out your code of conduct before you ever go running. You're full of energy, you're motivated, you're excited, and you want to scream it at the top of your lungs, and you want to get everybody involved. You want everybody to join. And then you got to build your mission statement and build your code of conduct and some of the other documents. That's the wrong order. Take the time and figure that stuff out first, because if you invest upfront heavily, you will not have as many problems down the road as you're doing this. It's like trying to fix the brakes on my car when I'm driving down the highway. That's not the time. Install the brakes before you start driving. And so this is an important thing. And I've noticed that several groups have done this since the convoy, where they've launched these groups and then they don't fully know how to define what they're about. They just have the passion to get everybody excited. And it's just in the reverse order. So I strongly encourage people. And if you don't know what to do, then research it, AI it, ChatGPT it, and come up with a way to create this structure. Okay, but I think this is really important do it in the right order of things. Don't try to fix your breaks. You don't want to be such a mammoth that your group is like what we say about the old Sea King helicopter. It was 10,000 parts all flying in unison. You don't want to be in that situation. So that's my best advice for anybody who is looking to either start something or has an issue that they want to fight back against. Do it in the right order. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think it comes with experience. And it's, if you can help anybody in that, there's been a few times when I was younger, you're in the frying pan and you don't even realize it. And it's like, okay, then you got to learn to dance in minefields. And that's not easy when you're young and you don't have the experience. So great message, Tom. Is anybody else who wants to add a piece of advice before we, if we can just go around the table, if Chris, if you have anything that you want to say in regards to round 3, or if you want to just have some final thoughts for the room, that'd be great. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, this isn't really my area of expertise, this part, actually drafting mission statements and code of ethics. So I'm hoping that before we have a follow-up session, that maybe we could put some concepts together behind the scenes, potentially. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Before it becomes this public thing, because I think doing the whiteboard exercise in a public forum might not be the most helpful to the viewers. So that'd be my only word of warning. Let's get our paperwork in order so that we can present something that's somewhat at least half-baked. So.
Absolutely, definitely. It could be fun for some to watch the whiteboard play out, but also could be very, very confusing and frustrating for others. So to keep anyways, thanks for that, Chris, and thanks for coming on tonight. Andre, if you have anything more you want to add, if not, then or both, a little bit more to add, and then some final words would be great.
Well, two things. First of all, when you tackle a problem and you form a group as a business analysis and as a strategist, I had to deal with many problems and to be able to form groups. Let's say you form a group with many individuals from many different domains, and you need to tackle a problem. I think the expression is whiteboard. I use brainstorming. At first, people, they grieve, forming a group, knowing each other, developing relationship is very important. So the leader or the host of the group, or who will animate the group, has to understand who he's dealing with. Some people are very talkative. Some people are more shy. Some people, they are expert. They always have a solution for everybody. Some people talk a lot. Some people are I would say, more analytic. So as a host, for example, you have to understand who you're dealing with. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is you have two type of groups. You have a group, like you have a project, and you need a project manager. So the project manager is a diplomat. He has to be able to work with everybody. He has to be able to reward people and to put people back in line if they break the code of ethics, of the moral code, of they don't just, let's say, reach their goal in time. And then you have the other form of group management, managing a group of individual in a business. So it's a permanent job. Those are two different type of groups. The project has a beginning and an end. A business is growing. So you cannot manage a project like you manage a division, for example. The advice that I would say to people, identify the skills. I think Tom mentioned it, the skill of people, what they can and what they cannot do. You can challenge them and give them some good task to achieve, but do not push people too hard if they don't have the knowledge. If they don't have the knowledge, you can help them. Mentoring is very important. I used to create a mentoring program for network manager. Some network managers were extraordinary, but they were very, very poor at communicating their knowledge. So they were not good coach. They were great individual, but they were not good coach because they didn't want to coach a younger network manager. So the advice is simple. the right person at the right place, give people responsibility, but give them also the tools to be able to achieve their goal. If you say to somebody, you will do this task, but the person knows exactly that she will not be able to achieve it because she doesn't have the requirement, it's worse. You will just demobilize people. I think Tim mentioned the way that through an electoral campaign or grassroots movement, all people are volunteer. They all want to perform because they for recognition, because they feel the duty. So I think the second advice would be know who you're dealing with and try to. It's a question of trust them, but watch them also. I'll hand on that. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Andre. I'm not going to confuse them and mash together the final thoughts and stuff like that. We're just going to go around with any more final comments on what we're talking about, and then I'll do another round so everyone has a chance to have a final message to Canadians, and we'll wrap it up after that. So, Payman, floor is yours, bud.
Yeah, like imagine like a big authoritarian government. People usually call that statist, and then try to imagine the opposite of that, and whatever you would call that. You could call that libertarian. You could call it individualist. You could call it classically liberal. I just call it populist because you're working outside of the media political party machine. That's what my focus is on, I'll reiterate. It doesn't matter much to me whether that populist victory comes through the People's Party, whether it comes through Grant Abrams' party, the Christian Heritage Party, or whether it motivates Conservative Party supporters to actually get involved and take over that party and take it back. That's where my mindset, my headspace is at in going forward in the next year and a half. Thanks again, Chris.
Well said, Payman. Timothy, floor is yours. Some final thoughts on round 3 before we get to closing.
Yeah, I want to share a little story about a successful mission, right, from a movement perspective. 2 Fridays ago, I got a call from People's Party headquarters, and I was told, we want you to send a candidate out to the ostrich farms and get us an official statement acting as, right, the voice of the People's Party of Canada. And of those who were available, I spoke to Chris Enns, who's here in the call with us, and inside 6 hours, he was set and ready to go on his way. And so what we have is we have our principles, all right, our policies, established a permeable boundary in parameters in which he knew he was able to operate. He already brought in his existing and previous skill set. We talked about a skill set inventory. So he applied that himself. He said, what exactly do you want me to do? I'm down here in Vancouver, right? And he's up in the center, right? And he went by himself. So everything was done by email or by the telephone. And I said, diplomatic, statesmanlike principles, and good production values. And he said, anything else? I said, I trust you. You know what you're doing. And out of that, he extended it to a 3rd day of his own choice, and it worked out perfectly because it was on the 3rd day that we got an interview between him and Max. Perfect, right? So we have 22 minutes of quality video content that no other outlet in the country got. So we had a single mission: go there, take photo ops, get interviews with key individuals if you can get it, relax, feel the experience, immerse yourself in it, and also act as the actual official party representative. And he did a masterful job. Now, so we come close, the mission's been accomplished, that chapter is closed, and we sit here now saying, now that we've accomplished this, what's next? And that's a perfect example of basically everything accomplished in 3 days. We know that organization works, and having the right people at the right time works, and people whom you can trust to operate independently and deliver. And he did so in spades. So that's all I have to say about that.
That's a great story, and it's true in so many different ways, right? Keep it linear, keep it very focused as far as what your objectives are. Scrum before, determine what the goals are, deploy the game plan, and then Scrum after, as far as what do we learn, and what do you want to do moving forward. So, very well said, Timothy. And I want to thank, honestly, everyone for being here tonight. It was but in the if you're just tuning in now, yeah, the first part of the stream crapped out on us, but thank you to Payman for picking up the ball there. Again, teamwork to make sure we can kind of get this stuff, that we can get this out to the public. And I think it's the start of something here, right? It's one of those things that you have to have the general idea of what are the frameworks of structure, what are the potential pitfalls, and it all comes back down to diligence in many ways. And as well, discipline. I've seen some people in the comments mentioning that as well too. We will get to comments next time, I guarantee it. But I think that it's important for people to understand that you have to have these discussions, right? And anytime you're building a new group or starting a new initiative or starting, you want to make change. I get DMs all the time from people, and so I'm hopeful that this will answer some of those questions as far as what would I say to each individual, because I can't get to everybody all the time. But it is, if you have a great idea, something you want to do your diligence before you get on the field, right? I'll say one more thing before we go around and say goodbyes. I had to learn, through having good mentors and through just experience, that you can come and you can have an idea and it's all laid out. And here's the history of the universe, right? Most people are going to say to you, okay, well, I don't have time for that. It's too confusing. It's too much. So you build your playbook for what your initiative is, for what you want to do, but you got to break that down into 10 pages, which is your walking document. And then you need that for 3 pages for people who don't really have a lot of time. And then you need 1 page, which is your elevator pitch as far as what you're doing, what you want to accomplish, and the type of people you're trying to recruit. So you got to be able to keep that book for yourself. I know you want to share it with the world, but there's not a lot of people out there no one's ever going to see exactly what's going on in your mind as far as what you're trying to accomplish. That's your baby. That's what you want. But you have to be able to break it down into steps that are clearly deployable, right? Check, like you said, the 3 to 1, as far as what is your baseline for being able to proceed into your next phase. So don't overcomplicate it. Pull it all back and make sure, again, the founding documents of before you bring anybody on board, you have to have a general idea of the ethics, unless you have a core group of people, right? But if you're just one of those people that has been in front of the whiteboard for a couple of years that wants to solve a problem, and you've got this thick book, break it down, 10 pages, 3 pages, elevator statement, and then protect it through the documents as far as when you go to recruit or whatever you're looking to do as far as those next steps. So that's for today. I think we hit a lot of good points. I think for people that are in that situation are going to be able to come away with having learned something and be able to access some of those tools, add them to their tool belt as far as how do they proceed. So I want to thank you guys again. We'll go around the room for some final thoughts and a goodbye, and we'll start with Tom. Thanks for coming out, Tom. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I won't say too much other than thank you for considering me even to be part of this conversation. I really do appreciate it. Just even to be considered to be on a panel like this is very meaningful for me. These are the kinds of conversations that I do like to be part of and enjoy being a part of. So whoever idea it was to think of me to be part of this, thank you. I really do appreciate it. And that's it.
I'm going to say props to Payman. Like you're always a consideration, but Payman did suggest a lot of the people for today and the structure. It just perfectly aligned with where I was at on a lot of things as well too. So hats off and thank you very much for Payman for helping put this together tonight. I appreciate it. Chris, the floor is yours. Some final thoughts.
Yeah, my thanks too to Payman and for all of you for being here. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and thanks for considering me as well. I'm new to this podcast live stream game, and I'm happy to be here and give any insights that I can. So cheers.
I look forward to the whiteboarding behind the scenes in the future. Thanks for coming out tonight, Chris. Really appreciate it. Andre, some final thoughts from you, my friend.
Well, the whiteboarding is very interesting. I used to manage that, and sometimes it can be chaos because people, they throw ideas at you and you have to do, like Tim says, Venn diagram and start to do categories. So that's funny. It's not always easy to accomplish. First of all, I would like to thank you, Chris, and Payman also. It was a pleasure to meet Tom today. I knew Chris because 2 weeks ago he was on Cerberus at the Improv, covering the ostriches, and Tim was right. It was a very good, not only episode, but a very good accomplishment. I was very happy to see this, and I see that Canadians, you have a lot of Canadians that are dedicated. We just have to find them. We just have to be able to talk to each other. That is a very good opportunity that you give us, and I thank you again for inviting me. Just waiting for the next session. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Andre. And yeah, we'll be doing one again in the future. We'll talk with Payman and see when we can align our schedules, but some prep beforehand. So I look forward to it. Payman, some final thoughts.
Thanks to everybody out here. Andre, Tim, it's always good to see you guys. Chris, good to see you again. Tom, it's nice to meet you. Chris Erickson, thank you very much for setting this up. And I don't know if we mentioned this, but this is technically your first foray of Nightcall into the video space. So congratulations.
Thanks for that. I got to figure out what was going on with my stream, but yeah, it is the first ever Nightcall X Live. And so it was an honor to have all of you guys here tonight for sure. I'll touch on that again after Timothy. Timothy, your floor is yours, man.
Thank you very much for being part of the panel. I appreciate the invite. Mr. Marazzo, young man, you disturber of the peace, you. This and the future of this is all your fault, man. And this is what it means. I'm reminded, there's a short little story. The sergeant finally makes it to the front of the battle line up to the hill. And there's a single soldier holding the flag. You know where I'm going with this. And the sergeant looks at now the single soldier. He's trembling because it's his, right? It's his commanding officer. And he says, "Son, does the hill yet stand?" I'm going to get choked up. And we will be able to say, "Sir, the hill stands, sir." This is a brave new world, and we are ones cut for it.
Beautifully said, Timothy. Yeah, I think this is one of those things where I knew this was going to be a great panel. I've watched, I've known Tom for a while now, Payman as well. Hadn't had too many opportunities to interact with Mr. Milosh, saw comments and stuff, but it was great to have you on. Sometimes I don't understand your humor, Timothy, but I'm getting there, which is great. I love it, right? But anytime something I read something, I'm like, what exactly does he mean? I love it because I have to dive deeper and actually, I learn from it, but I'm still a bit slow with it. And Chris, I've seen you before, but I haven't had a chance to interact. And I think that's why it's good for Canadians that are watching this to be able to see. It's like, we don't agree on everything, politically or whatever, right? None of that really matters, right? Like it doesn't matter what party we come from. It doesn't matter the work that we're doing in a sense. It's like, but we all have this feeling in our heart. We know our country is headed down a dark path, but how do we, come together and be able to find unity in amongst all of the chaos? And I think for me tonight, I'm very grateful. I'm honored that all of you came on. I was very taken, my heart was warmed with all of the different things that were said, because I'm thinking not just about what, the conversation I'm learning about you guys. I'm thinking about the audience and the people that will see, and learn from what we accomplished here tonight. And yes, it was the inaugural, it was the debut tonight for Nightcall X Live. I'll be doing more of those. I'll still be doing spaces moving forward. But at the same time, I think it's good to be able to see your faces, to hear your voices, as long as it's not glitchy like we had for the first little while. But I'll figure that out for next time, and there will be a next time. So I want to thank everyone tonight for being here. I want to thank everyone in the audience that's listening. I do apologize. I will make sure that comments and questions will come after we've done the whiteboard and we come back and we're laying things out for the next one of these. I guarantee you we will bring questions up and answer as many as we possibly can. So I'm going to leave it there and thank everyone again. And stay strong and soldier on. We got a long road ahead of us, but it's a lot easier if we're all sharing the weight. So thanks again, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.